Thanks for joining us, James, and really appreciate the talk that you gave at the Performance MDT. For those of the people that haven't watched it yet or weren't able to attend live, could you just give a brief summary, please?
Yeah, sure, mate. So basically, the talk was just focusing on some of the considerations using GPS in team sports. Well, mostly in the football codes, really. So basically, just talked about some of the papers that we've done recently. So the most recent one being a commentary piece that your good self was on as well, Steve, uh, where we actually then sort of very short piece, but I guess trying to give a condensed summary of some of the previous research papers that we've done in the area. So just things like how to collect your data, some of the considerations for data handling, bit about sort of noise and signal of data as well, about how to set up sort of reliability and validity protocols. And then just finished on a bit more of the fluffy stuff, the soft skills, trying to figure out, I guess, best ways of best practice to actually getting the message across to key stakeholders.
Brilliant. Cheers to that, James. Thank you. So, got a few questions that we weren't able to answer due to the busy agenda during the day. So, the first one was, there was a question from Professor or Dr. Rick Lavelle, like he's too smart for his own good now, asking you to define drunken, but I think we'll sketch over that one. So, question number one, what do you see as the fundamental starting pillars for someone looking to gain experience and knowledge of working with GPS data within an elite academy?
Cool. Yeah, I mean, these days, pretty much every academy has got one, particularly in the UK. So I don't think there'll be any problem in terms of getting hands-on data and things like that. Um, I guess for me personally, it was just a case of learning on the spot. So you kind of like I was lucky; I had a couple of good mentors along the way. I mentioned in the talk. So like Steve Tash, who's was at Everton at the time, and Darren Burgess, who was at Liverpool. So I think for me, the best way is learning from people who've actually got expertise in the area, particularly on a day-to-day basis as well. Um, yeah, someone like Steve Tash was really good with me. He sat me down every day and kind of, I'd have hundreds of questions for him about data and how to actually analyze and get the data off. And he was very patient with me and taught me quite a lot, really. So yeah, definitely have some sort of mentor in terms of someone to talk you through it. There's also quite a lot of good resources now, which there probably wasn't when I started. So you can go on things like, for example, like the Catapult education courses now, which do sort of level one, level two based introductions to GPS. And obviously, there's a host of webinars that Steve's made and various other online things which are free now for people to have a look at.
Cool. Cheers to that, James. So, question number two. Do you think it is important for research to use a combination of video footage and GPS to give context to movement in football?
Yeah, this is something I touched on a little bit in the talk, was around more so the actual tactical and technical elements. So obviously there's a lot of research which just uses GPS, just uses movement data. I know that the likes of Paul Bradley and Chris Carlin and those sort of groups who try and sort of fuse together the technical stuff with that physical output as well. For me, it's very important, particularly when you're talking to a coach and, if you don't understand the terminology and like the playing style and philosophy, I think if you just talk numbers at someone, they just get lost in it. So for me, it's definitely important. You need the key thing again is that quality of data. We're actually doing quite an interesting study at the moment with a few of the guys in the Premier League looking at comparing the data sets across different systems. So we've got the likes of the previous track data, the new second spectrum data, and then we've also got a couple of GPS companies as well. So that's purely from a physical perspective, but again, making sure your technical data is good and it's reliable is what we're after.
Cool. Thank you, James. And merging that physical and technical data sounds like could be ideal. I know Matt Varley and you were talking about making sure there was no crossover during your talks, and that Matt mentioned quite a bit during his presentation as well, didn't he?
Yeah, I work quite closely with Matt, and Matt's helping out with that study at the moment. And um, speaking a bit to Jack Aid, who's done his PhD recently at Liverpool, focusing on that really, the link of the technical stuff. And I know there was a little bit of back and forward recently with Ben Jones's group. So Sarah Whitehead, who's I actually did a PhD via her the other week before the lockdown, and they produced a systematic review around peak demands in rugby. And I think they had a bit of a counterpoint letter with the likes of Chris Carl and a few of the other guys there. So they talked about this notion of blind numbers and the fact that, you know, practitioners maybe just say, "Oh, run at that number of that number of distance or that intensity without the context." So, you know, there probably is some argument there to say we need to be careful that we do link it back into the context of the sport.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And the last one, away from GPS, what would you recommend practitioners to use for monitoring?
Good question. In terms of, I guess, like the external load stuff, I mean, to be honest, the way things are going is probably the LPS is the better system. You know, when I was at Catapult, we were developing the Clear Sky system at the time, and initially it was not the most reliable of systems based on some experiences, and then obviously as it's grown over the years, it's now a lot more solid. And you know, the last time I seen it, the data accuracy was about, I think, 20 centimeters positional accuracy. You know, compare that to a typical GPS, which is about 60 to 80 centimeters at best. You know, you're getting a lot more accurate data there in terms of your movement demands. The issue though is the cost, obviously. You know, those systems aren't cheap, and you know, if you're working in the lower leagues, and that clearly you're not going to be able to afford it. In terms of the internal load stuff, I think there's a lot of question marks about that at the moment, in my opinion, in team sport. So there's been a few debates about things like heart rate and how good that actually is in intermittent sports. You know, there's data to show, or the studies to show the link between, you know, external, internal load of heart rate. But, you know, having analysed thousands of heart rate traces in the time, you can see how unreliable that data can be, particularly in a sport like football where you get the belt moving around and just not picking up, and you know, it lags behind in terms of changing intensity as well. So I do think there's a big scope there in terms of how we can improve our internal load measures, and I think that's why people have actually just gone back to basics with the subjective stuff at the moment. You know, again, I'm having collected a hell of a lot of RPEs off players in the past. I'm very skeptical about some of that data. You read a lot of studies, and there's not really any mention to say that, you know, player A told me to do one day and I just gave him a 5 in the database. You know, there's not really documentation of that in research. So again, for me, I'd always strive to get something objective where possible. Whether that's some of this new nanotechnology that's coming. I know that Grant Apt has been talking about this for a number of years. Your old mate Steve. Some of these new technologies coming through in the medical world. I guess again, it just becomes back to affordability for most people, and also practically getting data out. If you can't get it within 20 minutes, then it's got no place in sport, really.
Thank you very much, James. And I know you've just taken up a new role with bases as well. Do you mind just giving the audience a bit of an overview of that, just in case you can help support any of the practitioners out there looking at bases at the minute?
Yeah. So I took on a role basically as a membership rep as part of that sport performance division group. So there's myself and 4 other guys and girls who were just trying to, I guess, push things on a little bit more at the moment. So the likes of Ibby and Adam have done some great work the last couple of years trying to, setting up the division days that we've done at Newham. I guess for us now, it's trying to utilise more of the online stuff in the short term. You know, particularly while everyone's trapped inside, maybe with a little bit more time to do a bit of CPD. So, you know, we're looking to set up a few Bases official webinars the next couple of months. Alongside that, once the ban's hopefully uplifted, we're going to do a lot more CPD in terms of the practical stuff as well. And, you know, we had quite a good response to a recent survey, which we sent out, and you know, the feedback for us was valuable because we're able to now clearly see what our members want and then how we can actually act on that as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. And thank you once again for your time during the presentation. If anyone's got any further questions, are there any particular avenues like social media or email that they can reach you on?
Yeah. So my email is malonej2@hope.ac.uk, and yeah, drop me a message on Twitter as well. So it's James Malone 5 on the Twitter handle.
Brilliant. Thank you, James.
All right, cheers, Steve.